Thank you everyone for showing up. A number of thank yous are really in order. I don't know where to start. First of all, I'll start with Beth Jacob. It's been so kind to host these series now. If you remember last year, we started the second series in February, March, and then the rest of it ended up in our Zoom world. Hopefully, we'll be redeemed from the Zoom world through these amazing lectures. We'll somehow make the world a better place. At the same time, I need to thank a number of individuals, Beth Jacob, Rabbi Top, of course, and I'll come back to a point about how this series is supposed to go and the way we discussed it about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago by now. And then I need to thank Dr. Ann Winter. I don't know if she's on or not, who's been keeping our chevra together now for 12 years. This is our 12th year together. For those of you who have faithfully attended, and there are many of you here, all the lectures in between, we are starting our 12th year. So Baruch Hashem for that. So, and then of course I want to thank those of you who always faithfully come to these lectures and send emails and questions. And it's deeply appreciated. You're an amazing audience. You've been so supportive. And what can I say? I'm humbled. If you're wondering about the background was inspired, I wish I could say by my library, it doesn't come close, by, if you've ever seen Dr. Sid Lieberman's website, and you can actually Google it, it's Lieberman Library. He uses for his background the Prague Library, which is gorgeous. I could switch in a minute and go to the Prague Library. I've got them in my virtual background, but this is the Oxford Library. So we'll stay with Oxford right now. I could have used the Hebrew University Library, Library of Congress, and all that. But I think we should take out 2 minutes before we go on, because you're all students of history. And just for a minute, pause on the sad events that happened in the Jewish world in this past week. Bereft of two great people, very different people, yet both devoted deeply to the Jewish people. Dr. Lord Jonathan Sachs, who's really been a giant on whose shoulders we stand, especially those of us who speak of the modern Orthodox world. His writings, his influence has been, and the family member that's here, good to see you. He's the Baruch. May his memory continue, and you know, the legacy he has left will go on for eternity. That's the beautiful thing about our people. Think of Rashi, and I use this example all the time. Rashi wrote his commentary a long time ago. Yet every single day, 24/7, people stop and learn Rashi. The sun sets in LA, it rises somewhere else. People are getting up and they're learning Rashi. And so with the Rambam, etc. The writings of Rabbi Sachs will go on forever. Tremendous contribution. In the world of halacha, Rabbi David Feinstein from the legacy of the Feinstein family, a giant in his own right as a posek. Again, a loss. So may their memories be for blessing. May their works and their devotion to the Jewish people really inspire us. Now, what I want to do, if you've paid attention to the name on these lectures, there's like a little subtitle. And this was done initially in our conversation with Rabbi Top, because if you remember, the lectures were literally all over the place. We lectured about Jewish music, we lectured about Jewish doctors, you name it, philosophy, historical events here and there, the Odessa pogroms, whatever. But he said, wait a second, maybe it should become a class and it should have a continuum. And we've been traveling that journey and we're hitting modernity for quite a while. But if you notice the subtitle of the lecture, I've entitled it, The Seeds of Modern Orthodoxy. So what I would love to do, and it will take a while, and bear with me, because today's lecture, I think, is a very difficult one. Difficult because I want to develop a certain thread in it. Whether it will be clear, I don't know. If I fail, not to worry, only because you're not getting a test. And okay, you didn't get it. I hope you had a good time and you've learned something, but I didn't make my point. I would ask, and I don't want an answer, because right now there is no good answer. Does anybody want to actually define modern Orthodoxy? Now, on the one hand, we identify ourselves, and I surely do, with a tremendous sense of pride. I'm an Orthodox Jew. It means something. I'm also proud to identify as a modern Orthodox Jew, even though the historian in me says, I have no idea what I'm talking about. It makes no sense, like a modern Orthodox. It's slightly, believe me, almost oxymoronic. Modern Orthodox don't really go, if you know the meaning of the word Orthodox. The term itself, and I'll just put it out there because we'll get to it next week, appears for the first time in Germany in the late 1700s. And Orthodox Jews at the time, who have never been called that before, were not very happy about it. And that led to an entire controversy about the usage of the word. It actually arose in Christian quarters, as many things in Germany end up in the Jewish world from the Christian world. And it had to do with, call them Orthodox Catholics, Orthodox Christians, yesh v'yesh. And then we borrow this term and we use it today. And then, so how did modern Orthodoxy come to be? If you think of it in our reality, right now, in its simplicity, there are at least two modern Orthodoxies. Just think of the distinction between a modern Orthodox Jew in America, who we are told, if you ask, would look to Rav Soloveitchik as their mentor, and modern Orthodoxy in Israel, where it's Rav Kook, and the people follow Rav Kook, and religious Zionism is the mantra for modern Orthodoxy. Granted, with the great movement of Jews from the Anglo-Saxon communities into Israel, you're now beginning to get both together, the influence of the American Orthodoxy on the modern Orthodoxy of Israel, and that's shaping. So what I'm really saying in short is, wait a second, Lieberman, don't go there so fast. And we can't even decide what it is. And the reason is very simple. It's because we're living in it right now. Modern Orthodoxy has not yet made an imprint. We're using a term. What it really means, ask me, being that I'm 4,000, ask me, in 200 years from now, and we'll give a lecture on modern Orthodoxy. To be in it right now causes both a very blind spot for certain things, and also historically, it would be totally inaccurate. But anyway, I'm modern Orthodox. Okay, whatever that means. But I want to start, and let me share the screen with you if I find it. I had it up there somewhere. Yeah, an article in the New York Times, which some of you might remember because I've used it once before for a whole different, can you see it? It's in March of 2003, not that long ago, in the way we count time. It is entitled Miracles, Dream, Prank, Fish Talks, Town Buzzes. And I'm sure many of you remember it. I remember it because I was involved in a controversy with some whatever. Anyway, so listen to what it says. This is the New York Times. It was the front page, by the way, towards the bottom of the page. And so it came to pass that a talking carp, shouting in Hebrew, shattered the calm of New Square Fish Market and created what many here are calling a miracle. Of course, others are calling it a Purim trick, a loopy tale worthy of Isaac Bashevis Singer, or just a whooping fish story concocted by a couple of Meshuggahs. Whatever, and it's a long, wonderful, you could just Google it and read it, or if you want the link to it, whatever, I'll send it to you. Now, when you read this story, you see something quite amazing. as it gave it away almost in the beginning. This story about talking fish in a fish market. It was around Parshat Mishpatim when it happened. And lo and behold, the entire reaction in the Orthodox world was divided literally into two, maybe three attitudes. As the article said, many thought it was a miracle. The fish spoke. God decided to send a message through a fish. And people who believed it quoted a particular statement in the Zohar, et cetera, et cetera. Other people said, it's ridiculous. Fish don't speak, et cetera, et cetera. Now, why couldn't we agree? Very simple. Yes, it's a miracle, and go on. Or no. Now, you can break down the reaction with terminology that historically is inaccurate. And if I would be teaching this in a high college class of history, someone should be throw a rock at me. But the point is very clear. The modern Orthodox world said a fish made some noise, whatever. Call them the other Orthodoxy, whatever they might be called, ultra-Orthodox, again, terminology is so dangerous, believed in it. And people argued for days about this. Well, the story came and the story went. You might also remember, and I wasn't sure which story to pull up, the Dibuk story with the woman in Dimona, where suddenly this woman was possessed and etc. She was exorcised and the demon was taken out. The reaction in the Orthodox world in that story was very similar. Why do I bring this up? And so now let me share with you and go back where we left you off, and you'll see exactly where I'm going. So allow me 30 seconds to find it. I have a screen filled with stuff that we're sharing today, and it's all over the place. There it is. Okay, let me go back to Zoom now. Let me see if my screen has it. Okay, tell me if you see this. Okay. So I feel like giving you a test. And the test would be identify the pictures. Notice overall, they're all in the 1700s, roughly. They cross each other. And maybe one or two knows the other one or about them. So all the way here, now let me go in order of age. In the middle is a picture that's supposed to be the Baal Shem Tov, 1698 to 1760, the Baal Shem Tov. Next, this way, to my left, is the Gaon of Vilna. This, you might remember when we studied about the Gaon of Vilna, is probably the most accurate portrait of the Gaon of Vilna, but that's a different story. Notice his dates, 1720 to 1797. And the younger person, Moses Mendelssohn, 1729, 1786. These three historical, very important people, with what they teach, do, inspire if you want, write about, change the Jewish world. They changed the Jewish world. So I ask you for a second, and I'll come back to that in a minute. If you would take the modern Orthodox Jew, where would he fit? Which of these three would be the one to lead modern Orthodoxy? Don't answer the question, but just think of it. Now, the Gaon of Vilna's influence is huge. It has literally come to our day, almost uninterrupted in the yeshiva world, clearly. His presence is almost real in the yeshiva world. His name is mentioned every day in some Torah learning. But what really put him on the map as far as the trajectory of the future was his student. Chaim of Volozhin starts the Volozhin yeshiva in the beginning of the 1800s, and that becomes the mother of all yeshivot. So keep that in mind. The Baal Shem Tov and his dynasties of great Hasidic masters and leaders are still around today. That will be a lecture some point in the future, Hasidism of today, and what its future might be. We'll hold off for a while. But his influence immediately. Moses Mendelssohn's influence was huge too. If you remember, one of his great contributions in the early 1770s, I think it was 1772, was his Beur, was his translation of the Torah in German. Now, exactly what his intention might have been is irrelevant, but that particular contribution, besides his amazing book of philosophy, Jerusalem, and everything else that he wrote about, Moses Mendelssohn inspired an entire generation of people too. Initially, they were known as the Berlin, and we'll discuss them next week in detail, the Berlin Me'asfim. Within a few years of the translation, the Me'asfim, I believe in 1784, began publishing a publication called HaMa'asef, and we'll look at it. Its first edition, volume 1 of Ma'asef, and the Me'asfim wrote in Hebrew. All of them were overall, and I don't want to use the word Orthodox because it doesn't exist yet, it's about to be born, but they were all traditional people who were observant. The distinction was that they embraced the world and they wanted to know more about the world. They wanted to speak properly German, but they were not giving up their Hebrew. They were not giving up their traditions. This is not the beginning of the Reform movement. We'll get to that too, probably in 2 weeks or maybe at the end of next week. But the Me'asfim, this group of Berlin, Naftali Hertz Wiesel, if you remember his name from when we discussed Mendelssohn, was one of them. Each issue in Hebrew discussed issues of the day. In the first issue, by the way, it's opening page, and I'll show it to you next week, and it's available online. The entire HaMa'asef, I believe Tel Aviv University has them online, and you can just see every single issue and read it. The first volume, or year 1, volume 1, begins with a hesped, because the Shagat Aryeh, the great Talmudic scholar, had passed away. So to give you an idea of this publication, it's not filled with Torah, not at all, but it has in it issues of the day, and they're discussing how do we incorporate discoveries, science in our Jewish world. So if that's all I tell you right now, then which of these three becomes the best candidate to figure out, where do I put the modern Orthodox Jew? Is he like the Gaon of Vilna, to whom Torah learning was supreme? Is he or she like following the ways of the Baal Shem Tov, where prayer becomes that dveikut, where you attach yourself to Hashem and are out there doing things all day and trying to get in touch with God? Or is the modern Orthodox Jew more like a Mendelssohn? Again, this is no judgment on anything. You just realize where we are and how we got here and where we have been in the world of ideas. Having said all that, I need to make a different point, which is the following. Any given movement that at some point gets a label has to, especially if it's new, in its birth pangs, says, we're not that new. I find prototypes and models of people who were just like me 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. The Berlin Me'asfim and others before, in many cases, who were charged with engaging modernity too much, said, hey, we're standing on the shoulders of the Nesher HaGadol. We're on the shoulders of Maimonides. He engaged the world. He studied Aristotle. He was the greatest posek of the time. Look at his Mishneh Torah, great philosopher, his medical books. Was he not a modern Orthodox Jew? Or was he not a maskil to the maskilim? So what is interesting is that the modern Orthodox world, in trying to justify itself, looks back to models that the early maskilim looked to also, and use them as an example of saying, hey, what I'm doing is okay because look, great people did this in the past. So with that in mind, I want to speak of two people. One in the 1500s. So let me quickly show you and give you his entire great story. Okay. So I'll share the screen with you and give you the background. Okay, tell me when you see it or just shake your head. Okay, do you see it? Maybe I'll make it a drop bigger so you can totally see it. Let me maybe enlarge the drop. Oops. I guess it's not letting me, hold on. Okay, here's a book published in 1570 something, 1573. Notice the author's name, Rabbi Azariah min Ha'adumim, and this book has three parts. Kol Elokim, Hadratza Keinim, and Imre Binah, published in Mantua, Italy. Now, Azariah min Ha'adumim, born in 1511, dies in 1578, was an amazing human being. And I shouldn't say that because I'm prejudiced, but Azariah min Ha'adumim made a major contribution to Jewish history. Lives in Mantua. He is, what should I say, a sickly person from birth. It doesn't stop him from studying and actually becoming a physician. He's a doctor. And that's how he earns his living. But don't for a minute think that physicians 400, 500, 600, 700 years ago made a fortune of money. They did not. So even though he's a physician, he's not making a lot of money from being a physician. So complain about Obamacare a long time ago if you want, as physicians do. There were other things in store where whatever I guess they were charging was not really doing well. But he studied. He loved books. He was never seen without a book. He learned the languages beyond the Greek and the Latin and of course the Italian and everything else. And he read every book to such a degree that like you wonder, is he going to do something with all this knowledge? And he doesn't. He is 60 years old in the year 1570 when an earthquake occurs in Ferrara. It was a huge earthquake. 200 people died in Ferrara that night. You can go and look it up because it's a very famous earthquake in Italy in 1570, the Ferrara earthquake. it lasted in aftershocks, and this is California we're speaking from, for over a year. And there were over 2,000 recorded aftershocks. Azaria de Rossi and his family are spared. He's actually buried under the rubble of his house with his entire family. I don't remember the number of days that he is in that condition, but he does what he himself calls a cheshbon hanefesh. Let me figure out. I lived, my family lived. It's clearly a miracle. What should I do? And he doesn't know what to do, but he says, I'll take the knowledge that I've gained and I'll give God a gift with my knowledge that God has given me to be able to amass. Not possible to live in Ferrara. He moves a few villages down and moves into this house. His next door neighbor is a Christian scholar. Christian scholars very happy to meet Azaria min ha'adumim. Again, if you ever study Italian last names, they tell you much about the person. That's why his other name is Azaria de Rossi, Adumim, red. One of the old families of Jews in Italy. The family actually claimed to have been there from the time of the Galut that Titus brought to Rome. He speaks to this Christian scholar who asks him a question one day. He says, you're Jewish, you're learned, it seems. Can you tell me, what are the Jews saying about a book? And Azaria says, which book? And the Christian scholar says, a book in the Apocrypha, again, the Sfarim Chitzonim, the letter of Aristeas. And Azaria says, I know what it is, because I've read the Apocrypha, but most Jews don't know what it is. Really, says this Christian scholar, how could that be? It speaks of the wisdom of the Jewish people. Now, the letter of Aristeas is, what should I call it? The story of the translation of Torah into Greek, the Septuagint. It's the earliest source from somewhere roughly around 1st century BCE or maybe 2nd century BCE, quite old. And it speaks of Talmai, Philadelphus, who builds this great library in Alexandria, which we spoke about. And if you remember, we discussed the letter of Aristeas. Jews would know of it. It's in that other set of books next to the Christian Bible, not the Jewish Bible. The Jewish Bible ends, and then we're done. We have the book. In the Christian Bible, if you've ever spent the night in a good hotel and you pull it out, you'll see the Jewish Bible. Then you get the very clear Apocrypha, Book of the Maccabees are in there. And then you get the Christian Bible. As you know, hanging around me, I don't really like to use Old Testament and New Testament unless we have to. So Azaria says, you know what? Because I was saved, I'm going to write a book in Hebrew about the Apocrypha, about the Septuagint. So these 3 books that he writes, the first one, Kol Elokim, is about the earthquake itself, how the earthquake happened, the whole story, and thanking God that he survived. The second component of this book, again, Ma'or Einayim, I'll come back to the title in a minute, speaks of Hadrat Zakenim. The Zakenim, the elders, referring to the 72 sages who had come to translate Torah into Greek. But in doing so, he looks at other sources. And for the first time in the Jewish world, in Hebrew, Azaria de Rossi speaks of, and I'll do a show and tell. I don't know how much this is coming through. Can you see it at all, or it's not clear? Sharing screen and this gets very difficult. If I hold it back, maybe you'll see it, like right here. It's the book of Philo. Philo. If you've hung around me, you've heard of Philo, one of my favorite characters in Jewish history. Philo, for those of you who have not, in one sentence, was the great Jew of Alexandria, traversing between the end of the first century CE into first century, BCE into CE. Philo wrote 50 books, all in Greek. Philo was an observant Jew. He wrote a commentary to the Torah in Greek. And Azariah now puts his name into Hebrew, lets the world know about Philo, lets the world know about all these other sources that speak of the wisdom of the Jewish people, and he's very proud of it. But okay, but then in examining history and being very astute at knowing literally whatever works were around, Azariah de Rossi, or Min Hadu Minu, he is the first one, and again, I'll take it close to me. Here is the book of Yosifun. I'll hold in my hand the other book. Put them side by side. Josephus, Yosifun. Now, Josephus and Yosifun is in Hebrew. And if you open it up, it says right in the beginning that this is the book of Yosef ben Gurion HaKohen, which was Josephus's name. And when you start to examine chapter by chapter everything Josephus wrote in his book and what Yosifun has in his book in Hebrew, it matches up. Until you get to a certain part, well, like Yosifun continues, and there is no Josephus anymore. Now, Josephus died roughly in the year 100 CE. In Yosifun, you'll find stuff that goes up to like 5th, 6th century. And according to some scholar, depending on which manuscript you look at, even maybe 7th or 8th century. But the assumption was that all of Yosifun in Hebrew is literally Josephus himself. Azariah proved that there are so many additions and people played around with the text and added historical events and et cetera, et cetera. By the way, if you remember the story about Josephus having met Vespasian, the story that the Gemara tells us about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Josephus speaks of himself too, predicting to Vespasian that he'll be the emperor. One edition of this book, the one that I was holding up in my hand, I'll put right here, actually, based on that story, claimed Josephus was a prophet. And therefore, Josephus was able to predict the events 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century. Okay, we're not going there. But he put that book out there and questioned its authenticity as far as being Josephus. And then he came to the third part called Imre Bina. And here, this got him in deep, hot water. Azariah de Rossi took all the events in history and looked at the Greek, the Persian, all the other calendars to see if the events match up. And he realized, and you all know this from what I call good Jewish education, that in the Jewish world, we speak of the missing years. It was Azariah de Rossi who discovered this concept of the missing years. Some 164, 65 years, our calendar from creation of the world is off. That means we're not in 5781, add 160 some years to it, and that's the accurate year. You might be okay with it because you say we're closer to the year 6000 and Mashiach is coming and we're okay. That was not the reaction of the Jewish world at the time. It was kind of scary if you read about it. And it's a great story, not for now, but Azariah de Rossi breaks the Jewish world into at least two ideologies again, as the Rambam did when he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim. Many rabbis support him. Many rabbis banned the book. And it was published only then, never again, until the 1790s, when the Berlin Asafim published the book again. In fact, the Maharal, the great Maharal in Be'er HaGolah, actually reads the book. Now, Be'er HaGolah is a great, wonderful book, and we spoke of the Maharal once only in passing, and we're not doing him justice just to bring him up and dismiss him. But the Maharal himself developed his own attitude to all these issues, and this book did not agree with him. So at the end of the book, he says, I wrote my book, Be'or HaGolah. Now let me explain what he wanted to do in that book. The Maharal in this book takes all the midrashim and actually has a system of how midrash works. And to him, every word of every midrash is important. Azaria de Rossi, through looking at historical, critical eyes at midrashim, begins to realize that many, many midrashim where an actual event is described might not be historically accurate. And what happens, Azaria will ask, with the story of the Septuagint, where rabbinic sources disagree about how it happened, how many translators, how many translations. Like one source, Midrash Tanchuma, has one tradition. Like, which one is the historically accurate one? And Azaria tried to do that. By doing that, you're dismissing the other ones as being inaccurate. The Maharal was upset. And he devoted, and that's the beauty of the Maharal. He has his own system, how all this works. And this book was published. He was not afraid to take it on and criticize it. In fact, he said, if I can find the Hebrew quickly, I folded the page, but let's see how quickly I can find it. Muftachani, Kilo Yisharu La Sefer Hazeh Shem V'Sherit BeIsrael. No one will remember this book. Rak Yadunu Oto Kamishpato, and this book will disappear. It did not disappear. The book survived. And lo and behold, the early Maskilim want to publish the book. And just to throw it in there, in the early debates of modern Orthodoxy, to justify itself, Azaria de Rossi is a role model of the person who stayed faithful to Torah and mitzvot, but used a historical critical method. And that's all I'll say right now. So keep him for a second. And then I want to go with you. Let me find one more. Let me get rid of this. Clean up my screens here. Let me see if this is the right one. Yep. Okay, let me just get it open here. Living in the Zoom world, I'm pushing buttons all day. Okay, tell me if you can see it. Okay, so that's the Mitzaref L'Chachma of the great, and you can see his name there, Yosef Shlomo HaRofe del Medigo, who was known simply as Yashar Mikandia, Kandia being the island of Crete. So here is Yosef Shlomo Rofe, that's the abbreviation. Yosef Shlomo Rofe of Kandia, who for a while, and just watch he's from Crete, spends part of his life being the rabbi of Hamburg and part of his life being the rabbi in Amsterdam. Who is this fellow? Now, he was born in 1591 and lives until 1655. Yashar Mikandia. And he too begins to literally do something similar. He's aware of Azariah de Rossi. He will quote him. At least you think that Azariah de Rossi disappears, even though it was not published. A student of the Maharal, I don't know if you can see it, Tzemach David, student of the Ramah and the Maharal in Poland, one of the first history books written by Jews in Poland in the early 1600s, Tzemach David quotes from it and speaks of the Ma'orei Naim. But this Yasher Mikandia has a library, loves books too. He speaks of 7,000 volumes in his library, and actually speaks of, not sure what to do with this statement, that wherever he goes, his books are with him. I don't know how you schlep around 200 books, leave alone 7,000 books, but okay. Yasher Mikandia becomes a wandering Jew. And I mean that in a good way, even though the term wandering Jew is a Christian term of not good things. Yasher Mikandia travels. You just name a place, Constantinople, Cairo, Hamburg here. He comes to Poland. And in Poland, let's read the text. I copied it somewhere. Bear with me again as I get rid of one. Okay, where is his description of Poland? Okay, here it is. Comes to Poland, where he will spend a tremendous amount of time. Okay, let me share it with you. Okay. He speaks that, and copy the previous quotation. The word that's missing there is darkness. Darkness covers the earth, and the ignorance of the Jews of Poland is fearful. Despite the fact that the whole land, Poland, is filled with Talmudic academies and houses of study, even the study of Talmud is extremely backward. For all the thousands of people who hasten to the academies and beat on the doors of Torah and Halacha have in mind only physical matters, purely material purposes, livelihood, honor, pride, extraneous motives. Men are interested only in careers, to become rabbi, judge, the rector of an academy, the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of a community. He's so upset about this that he calls this plague has infested everything. The highest and most important has become secondary. Merely these are a means for a petty goal and little desires. And they waste the best times writing to the fairs of secular wisdom, which Yasher of Kandia obviously acquired. By the way, he spent 4 years with Galileo, and he writes about it, that have no concept whatsoever. Every science is hateful to them. God, they say, you might have heard this from other people too. Sometimes you hear it from students. God needs no grammar, no rhetoric, no mathematics or astronomy, no logic, certainly no philosophy. All these secular sciences were devised by the people of the world. One must flee from them. They may, God forbid, lead one off the right path. Okay, this is Yasher Mikandia. Now, we actually possess, and I'll show you, we know exactly what he looked like in one of his books. He sat down for a portrait, and he actually published it all himself, so we can get to see him. Okay, let me just enlarge his draw. Now, watch around his name once you see it, is Yasher Mikandia, done by a non-Jewish artist. Here's Yasher Mikandia. Now notice his name, Yosef del Medigo, and now you'll see del Medigo means the Medigo, from the island of Crete. a doctor of medicine, and a year. Now, I ask you, because you've all hung around me long enough, this is Yasher Mikandya. This is the one who traveled the world, became chief rabbi of Hamburg for a while, of Amsterdam, writes all these books. Yasher Mikandya absolutely, again, he spends time with Galileo, writes about it. He's the first Jew to speak of the new ideology of Copernicus and the old Ptolemaic way, and all that went out the window, and Galileo gets all in trouble with the church and all that. And he speaks of it as cutting edge Mada, as something that the Jew would want to know. So clearly he too becomes a hero, both of the Maskilim and again, the modern Orthodox, to justify what they're doing. Look at Yasher Mikandya. Now, I want to share with you one piece of one of his books. And for this, you'll have to give me a minute. So I got to go to one of my emails. I didn't have time to actually set it up on my screen, but now it should work. Okay. Okay, I hope this works. Can you see this? Someone shake your head. Okay, thank you. Now notice the website I'm on. I'm at HebrewBooks.org. So I know that many of you attend the Speaker Reisman Shiurim. Please tell him that I paid a tribute to him, an amazing human being here in Los Angeles. I know he does not like to be called rabbi, even though he's got every good reason to call him a rabbi. His outstanding qualifications of being an unbelievable Talmid Chacham. I don't even know how many volumes of his both Sifrei Halacha and Sifrei Machshava or Bratz Katzvi have been published. I have them all. I have an entire Reisman shelf of his books. But he actually supports this website, and if not for him, I don't know what we would do. Notice, and if you can see it here, you can't. Right now, HebrewBooks.org has over 60,000 Sfarim that you can get in a second at the click of a button. You can download them, print them, or you can read them online. In one of Del Medigo's books, in Yashar's books, he publishes a letter from, I'm not getting into details, from a particular rabbi from Satanov to a Mordechai from Lemberg. And here's the letter. And this is inside his book. And I'll read a little bit of the Hebrew, but I'll translate. He says, I want to tell you of a Maaseh Hashem HaGadol V'Hanora, an unbelievable story, which I first heard, and then V'ra'iti B'einai, I have witnessed the story. It's in the city of Satanov. And like we only heard such stories, and I'll just translate, from our parents, from our fathers, from our forefathers. Ashrei Ayin Ra'ata Kol Eile. Happy is the person who sees what I saw. Then he gives us the name of the city, Girinek, which is close to Satanov, etc. There's a man whose name is Gedalia. This man, Gedalia, has a son who's 4 years old, 4.5. A regular 4-year-old. En lo yitaron b'limudo al shar yoladim. He's no brighter than any other fourth. But kasher hitchil aviv, when the father started to teach him Aleph Beis Gimel, suddenly Ra'ah ki nacha alav ruach hakodesh. This kid, this 4-year-old, was possessed of the Holy Spirit. So what did he do? He brought this child to Satanov, to me, the rabbi here, to test him. And this rabbi says, and I tested him, ad me apamim, beyoter. And not only me, but all my chaverai, all my other friend rabbis. V'ra'inu et maseh Hashem. And this kid is unbelievable. No matter what question I asked him, he answered me. I took a book, he says, and I stayed away from him and asked him like what page I'm on. And v'hitchil hana'ar lahagid li, ma shekatuv sham. I even pointed to a word, he says, on a page. And this kid is like unbelievable. Then he quotes an earlier source. In the late 1200s, the Rabbi speaks of a child who has endowed with something, and the Rabbi's got good questions about it all. And then it ends with this particular letter, like everyone should come and see what an amazing child this is. Now, if earlier in the book, let me see if I can get it right. Yeah, here it is. Yasher Mikandia wrote about this earlier in the book, and later on he published this letter. He says he traveled, he was in this locality, and he heard as he came to Poland about this amazing child. He goes, he wants to see this child. But the minute he gets very close, he's very skeptical. And I saw, and I'll just show you the word tachbula, shehaya meramez lo ha'otiot im hakinuim. His father had devised an entire methodology of how to communicate with his son. And every answer was given by the father. The father looked to see where this book was open to, or on and on and on, which means Yashar Mikandia exposed a charlatan, a fake. And he wrote about this. And he sent letters to the communities about this. But should I bring up the talking fish? Should I bring up the lady who was possessed by a dibuk and demona? Because if you read the letters in Poland at this time, Yashar Mikandia was not even paid attention to. It went right by the side. In fact, the news traveled all the way to Tzfat. And suddenly the students of the Ari were quoting the Ari, who had long passed, that the Ari said, one day in the future, there'll be a child in Europe who will have Ruach HaKodesh. So interestingly, it becomes these stories of the supernatural that become like the testing ground between a particular ideology, or do we look at it in natural means and try to understand it in what we would call today a modern world? I use this example on purpose. Now, in Jewish literature, and if you want, we can have a lecture like that one day about all these Wunderkinder in our history. There are many. The Rashba is one of the earliest. There's a famous Nachman, if you've heard. So these stories do appear. And they do have narratives quite interesting and fascinating, who gets involved with them. But in setting up the trajectory of where these lectures will be going. So as we leave the 1700s, the world of the Jew is waffling. I wouldn't say it's a violent time. The 1649 pogroms of Khmelnytsky did their damage. The 1700s are, what should I say, a world of ideas. Hasidism is coming and floating around. I don't have to, and I don't want to waste too much time. I'll give it 3 minutes. Well, let me do a test. I set it up so maybe I can actually find it. Okay, I think this is it. Hold on. Okay, tell me, mi huzeh hagadol hazeh. Who is this amazing gadol? Are you ready? Unmute yourself if you know the answer. And I'll take a drink while you share with me your answer.
Oh.
Who's this? Who is that?
Yaakov Yosef Lubavitch.
Ayala, tell me, who is he?
Yaakov Yosef Lubavitch. Do I know who it is? Absolutely not. I'm sorry.
Anybody identify him? Because you should know.
We should?
Like the second or third?
I'm sorry, what did someone say?
Is he one of the Chabad rabbis?
Lubavitch? Is that what this is?
No.
Oldest, yes.
Okay, you're looking at none other. This was his real name. He never used it. This is Jacob Frank.
This is Jacob Frank.
1726, 1791. Who is Jacob Frank? Anybody know? If you don't know, let me just like redo my screen here.
Shabtai Tzvi comes to mind.
Whoa, I hear a voice of an amazing scholar out there.
Yeah.
Cult leader.
Yeah, cult leader Shabtai Tzvi. I guess he believed in, let's see, Shabtai Tzvi was dead already, but he was a later devotee of Shabtai Tzvi.
Whoa, Dr. Goodfried, good to see you.
That was him, and he also only had 300 followers. Also completely perverted Judaism.
Henry, thank you. He was a little more complicated than that, but Jacob Frank in Poland caused huge controversies. He was a Jew who, what should I say? He made an art form of being an Am Haaretz. Being totally unlearned, not only was he proud of it, he was like, in the proverbial yeshiva language, the Am Haaretz d'oraisa. He knew how to read Hebrew for sure. He picked up statements, but he started a following. He claimed not only that he was a reincarnation, he was born exactly 50 years after Shabtai Tzvi had died. He was the second reincarnation, third reincarnation. It was Shabtai Tzvi, and now you get the Trinity in here, don't ask. But Jacob Frank was dangerous. The word that Henry used, which is perverted Judaism, doesn't even do it justice.
It was the start of fake news.
Yeah, we should have known right then that he would cause a lot of trouble. But imagine what the world, in the Jewish world, is worried about now. All these ideas. Another false, crazy guy who causes the burning of the Talmud, who actually debates to put down Judaism when he had converted to Catholicism, when he had already converted to Islam, after he already claimed he was Jesus, that blood libels are mentioned in the Talmud. Now that's dangerous. Approaching the church and debating in public. Rabbis who were forced to attend a debate in Poland, and actually he forced 2 debates, to actually claim that the Talmud speaks of blood libels. And eventually getting the Talmud burnt in Poland, in the city of Kamenetz, of all places. 1700s, and I'll stop here and let you simmer these ideas, and I apologize for dumping so much in here. But realize, if we're trying to figure out where we are today as Jews who engage both the world, and we do want to engage the world, I hope, and at the same time want to stay faithful to Torah and mitzvot, how we got here. It's been a dangerous journey in the world of ideas. And I'll end right there, saying thank you so much, and good to see you all. And then we'll continue next week, same time, same station. I just want to give everybody a bracha that next lecture should take place in Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh.
Amen.
Not in this Zoom room. And let's meet somewhere in Yerushalayim, close to, I see Dr. Hershkovitz is up here, to Rehov Tamid number 1. Where
Face to face.
family to live. So thank you, everybody. Good night. And again, if there's any questions, I'll stay on for a minute or 2.
You score.
Okay.
Open thing.
Be well, everybody.
Thank
Laila
you.
Tov.
Good night or good morning.
night,
at this
everybody.
point. Yeah.
Be well.
Good evening.
You left our sound on.
Goodbye, guys.
Jewish Theological Seminary in Berlin. That's already after Jacob Frank, or was he involved with that?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
Jewish Theological Seminary in Berlin.
After that.
That's after that.
Yeah, we'll speak of it next week.
Led
Sure.
by Frankists, or founded by Frankists, but he was long gone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, be well, everybody. Laila Tov. Again, thank you, everyone.
Laila Tov.
Oh, Benjamin, how are you? Good to see you. Send my best.
Oh. Ben Thomas.
Lila Tov.